Chapter 51 Jason's Demand by Hydesgrain. Mark, do something. Gabriella shouted worriedly before she noticed that these fox cubs didn't attack Jason with dangerous attacks. Rather, he would suffocate because so many small fluffy bodies buried him, causing Gabriella to look weirdly at the whole situation. Malia saw these few dozen fox cubs and lost all of her rationality. Closing her jaw that gaped open, she sprinted to the gate of the enclosure and opened it quickly. Walking slowly to the pack of fox cubs that looked fearful at her, as if she was a monster trying to rip them apart. They sensed her mana fluctuations, which were much more powerful than Jason's. Hiding behind Jason, he felt like a meat shield while the fox cubs squeezed themselves behind him as well as possible. Even Greg stood at the gate frame, looking at the fox cubs, interested as their fur seemed to be extremely fluffy. He decided to not care about his image in front of Jason anymore and went closer. Jason saw the gaze from Malia and Greg and looked worriedly behind himself. Will they survive these siblings? I don't want to test it out. He stood up and briefly considered something before stating, "Stop. They haven't eaten for God knows how long and they must be starving. Let's feed them." Without taking care of what Greg and Malia were doing, Jason pulled out the big parcel he got a few minutes ago and placed it down in front of him. While opening it, an appealing scent filled the air and Jason was stunned for a short moment. Taking out the baby bottles, the special milk, and the fox cub formulas, Jason decided to read the description of the fox cub formula before continuing. He didn't want to make a mistake. A minute passed and afterward, he asked the siblings where he could heat the milk. Around 10 minutes later the milk was finished and Jason decided to begin feeding the fox cubs. Each of them could smell the attractive odor and it felt like the earth shuddered as over 100 stomachs growled. Malia and Greg calmed down when they saw the greed for the milk in their eyes and sat down next to Jason, taking a prepared bottle to feed the lesser elemental fox cubes. Even Gabriella and Mark helped out because it would take too long otherwise, and unfortunately, they didn't have an automatic feeding machine for cubs. A whole hour passed until they were fed, and everyone was exhausted because the fox cubs were way too noisy and annoying. After the lesser elemental fox cubs finished eating, they just cramped together and began to sleep. Now Jason didn't know what to do and he had to ask Greg's parents for help. Mark was the first one to say something he had already imagined in his mind. He wanted Jason to sell every cub to them, which was Jason's initial plan in the beginning, but he could see a huge desire for money in Mark's eyes, which frightened him at first. Jason didn't want to negotiate very long, and he made a simple requirement they had to fulfill before he would sell them the fox cubs. Because Jason liked these lesser elemental fox cubs in front of him a lot, he was heartbroken to sell them, but he couldn't raise them up due to many reasons like them moving away, his scarcity of credits, expenditures, soul energy, and so on. His requirement was that the lesser elemental fox cubs were not allowed to be sold to all kinds of nobles and big families who treated their soul bond badly, all kinds of people with criminal records, and human trash with bad temper and behavior. It would be the best that these fox cubs could get soul bonds of loving humans who treat their soul bond as a family member, but I know that you can't force it. Nevertheless, some records would be available for nobles, and it's known which big families, clans and so on treating their soul bond with respect and love. While Greg gave him a thumbs up, Malia and Gabriella looked at Jason with a gentle smile. As Malia noticed that, she turned red and looked away at the fox cubs, while Gabriella was surprised that she felt proud of Jason and she subconsciously began to treat him like a family member, even though she wasn't sure why. Mark meanwhile was slightly frustrated. He didn't really care about what happens to the soul beasts after he sold them. Only a few families who tortured their soul bond could be seen as an exception because he found it disgusting and not logical. If he could decide where to sell these cubs, Marks would probably travel around the neighboring cities to sell them to big families for a satisfying price. But now more than half of his expected profit vanished instantly after Jason stated his requirement. Mark had to accept Jason's requirement, otherwise, he wouldn't gain a single credit, while Jason could go to the government and sell the fox cubs below the average price with his requirement. Jason was happy to hear Mark agreeing to his demand, and it felt like a heavy rock was pulled from his heart. The fox cubs couldn't leave the enclosure and Mark began his calculation. He already began to write some messages to someone while Gabriella offered Jason to eat dinner with them, which he accepted this time. While the dishes weren't anything special, the atmosphere was something he only knew from years ago, and Jason felt relaxed while eating with the Fleurs. He also noticed that Gabriella was the family's alpha because Mark was still calculating and writing messages when everyone sat down to eat. A slap at the back of the head was enough and Mark turned off the holographic screen to sit down obediently. Jason smiled at this sight lightly and he felt happy. After they finished the dinner, Artemis, who was curled up on his lap, got up and demanded her own food. Taking out all of the wild beast cores he hunted, Artemis gulped them down and her stomach bulged slightly before she vanished inside the white magic circle only to appear inside his soul world. The Fleurs didn't notice that Jason fed Artemis wild beast cores, otherwise, they would probably be astonished about it and would bombard him with questions. Jason wasn't hiding anything from the Fleurs anymore, and if they asked him, he would answer them honestly. He was tired of trying to cover the special abilities of his eyes and Artemis mutation. Hiding it even in front of the Fleurs would tire him out. In the end, the truth would come out. As such, Jason decided that he would answer possible questions about his eyes if the Fleurs asked him. Weirdly enough, they didn't ask anything, and Jason was more than happy to notice that, thinking that they were considerate to his privacy. After dinner was finished, Mark looked at a notification from his holographic screen. Frowning, he whispered something to his Gabriella, who thought for a moment before standing up. She suddenly declared, "We have to change our schedule. Our client wrote to us that he needs the Greater Storm Eagle in 2 days. Because our client's position is on our way to Syro City, we'll start our trip a little bit sooner. To arrive at the set date from our client, we will need to start our trip tomorrow, early in the morning. We will take the beasts with us and sell them either in the Giro City, which is the B-grade city our client is in, or we just sell them in Syro City, our final destination. Both cities will have a large demand for the beast cubs with their high elemental abilities, and we have some connection in both cities." Malia, Greg, and Jason were slightly astonished, but there was nothing they could do about it and they nodded their head as a sign of agreement. Jason had nothing left behind, except his tent, which was still standing nearby the dome, but fortunately, he could report it to the AI. The AI would call someone to remove the tent for a hefty sum, but he had no intention to call a shuttle to drive there, only to remove the tent and drive back. There was no time left for Jason to do that if his trip to Syro City would start tomorrow. He was expectant and happy at the same time. Chapter 52 Last Preparation by Hydesgrain. Gabriella turned to Jason saying, "You can sleep in the guest room today because we'll depart before the sun arises." Before Jason could say anything, Greg cried out in joy while Malia's face remained as calm as possible. Mark gripped Greg to calm him down and turned to Jason with a serious face. "To prevent any problems, I would like to purchase the lesser elemental beast cubs from you before we set off tomorrow. I already counted them. Because you've stated your requirement, we will set up a proper contract, so you won't need to be worried about anything." In front of Jason appeared a contract and Jason had only to sign it. The contract itself was pretty simple and the same as every beast contract, only a single requirement was stated from Jason, and the credits he would receive were also written on it. While Jason looked shocked, Greg whistled in amazement. Jason knew that he would gain many credits, because the number of these lesser elemental fox cubs was high. They were also relatively rare to find, small in number, and their high natural powerful elemental ability caused the price to increase by a large margin, but this much was astonishing. Mark counted 164 fox cubs and each of them was roughly worth 100,000 credits in his opinion, 16.4 million credits. "I'm rich," Jason thought, but when Gabriella saw the price she frowned slightly. "Honey," an eerie feeling permeated the living room, "I think you forgot that Jason is almost a part of our family." Gabriella was obviously displeased with the price and she continued, while Jason looked at her with shock, "Almost part of our family." Concluding the age of the low strength and soul energy with their futuristic growth to a low to mid-awakened beast, adding their rarity and outstanding elemental ability, I don't think these lesser elemental foxes are only worth 100,000 credits, right? Only their outstanding elemental ability is worth that much for above-average families who can afford it, and let's not start talking about hunter families, upper-class families, clans, big families, companies who provide their employees with soul bonds after a certain amount of time, and so on. Gabriella's eyes were fiery and she was heated. If her husband rebuked her one time, she would throw a fit, and Mark knew that. Greg looked proud at his mother while Malia felt slightly complicated by her mother's heated reaction and commentary. Jason understood completely where Malia had her temper from and smiled faintly. He didn't mind getting paid less than he should from the Flays, but he had to note that Mark was more than a little bit greedy. Okay, honey, please calm down. I'll change it immediately. The holographic screen disappeared from Jason's view and Mark tipped a new number before showing them to his wife, who was still displeased but not as much as before. 164 fox cubs for 130,000 each. Over 20 million. Or more accurately 21,320,000 million credits. Whoa. A radiating smile appeared on Jason's face as he looked at the Flays. Jason signed immediately, and even if Mark was a little bit displeased because he would make less income, he was still happy. With the right customers, many companies, families, hunters, and so on would purchase these beasts for high prices as the first soul bond for their children, even if he had to avoid a few families. Each fox cub was probably worth more than 200,000 credits in his opinion, and if he was honest, he hadn't done anything until now to deserve a single credit profit. Considering the fact that a soul bond would live with one for a whole lifetime, the price of 200,000 plus didn't seem that high compared to equipment which had to be replaced after a while. It was all Jason's luck because most birthing places were somewhere in wild zones, deeply hidden and covered to prevent intruders from finding them. Even if he himself were to search for these cubs in the 1-star wild zone, he would probably not find them as he couldn't sense so feeble mana fluctuations through the ground. Who was even able to do something like that? Mark would never praise Jason for his luck, but he was amazed about it, which he acknowledged. After business was finished, Mark opened a few shops to make online purchases and Greg showed Jason the room he could stay inside. Looking at his bank account, it was once again filled with a huge number with many figures, and he smiled naively. Entering the guest room, Jason was shocked about its size. It was probably larger than his whole apartment, which wasn't that difficult, but there wasn't much inside. It looked kinda lonely and sad seeing such an empty room with almost no furniture. But Jason didn't bother about that, and he tried to remain calm because he was way too thrilled right now. He felt really good that he could earn credits while doing something good. Jason was sure that if he hadn't done anything, the fox cubs would already dead by now because of the greater horned wolf and other possible predators. And with him selling the lesser elemental fox cubs and his requirement to Mark and Gabriella, they had a good chance to live a good life, or at least it would be better than dying. If Jason had to be honest, he wasn't sure what to do with over 20 million credits, and he had to think really hard about it. But looking at the online shops, he noticed that 20 million were nothing. Thinking about credits, Jason asked himself how much he would need to compare himself to his future classmates, or was he already close to them? Looking through the shops, he saw many high-graded weapons with amazing names and special effects they provided, but the price was ridiculous. Some of them were only able to trade against objects or materials he had never heard about. Purchasing mana weapons or soul weapons. Nice joke. One would at most be able to purchase the lowest, gradeless mana weapons with his money, but thinking about it, this mana weapon would probably still be better than his grade 1 weapons. But he wouldn't waste his credits for something like that. Before he would purchase things for himself, Jason would always think about Artemis first. She was in desperate need of more cores as the ones he provided were too low in grade for her, and she nagged him all the time. She wanted to receive 5-star wild beast cores at the worst. Thinking about that, he decided to use some of his credits to purchase beast cores in bulk. Jason wasn't sure how much the difference between wild beast cores and awakened cores were, and if he was somehow able to trick out the system. Searching through the official Federation websites, he found a useful thread. The question which results after seeing this information is, Why should you buy an awakened core if wild beast cores are much cheaper? And the answer isn't that difficult to figure out. To operate some machines, we need mana, and the amount needed in most factories is certainly large. Through long-term testing with certain machines, it was found out that mana-operated machines and devices empowered by wild beast cores break faster and errors happen more often. Why is that so? Because the purity of mana is also an important factor for almost everything. The fewer impurities a core has, the better is the mana inside it, and once a beast core is used up, the impurities within are comparable to glue, sticking to the mana vessel, destroying them slowly. This is also the reason why for most expensive mana-operated machines mana stones are used to prevent the stagnation of these machines and to prolong their lifespan. I hope my thread was helpful for most of you, and don't waste your money by purchasing wild beast cores. They will only accelerate the destruction of your expensive mana devices. Bye. Jason was interested in this thread and liked it. After reading the comments and a few other threads that came out with the same result, he purchased a huge bulk of 5-star wild beast cores. He asked himself if the ratio of 5-to-1 was the same for Artemis or not. Maybe Artemis would be annoyed by his decision, but he didn't care about it. Jason didn't want to waste much money in the beginning, because he wasn't sure what kinds of expenditures might come to him. And even if there were only 5,000 5-star wild beast cores for 2 credits per core, there wasn't much he could do wrong. 5 5-star wild beast cores were thus 10 credits, and a single awakened beast wild core was priced from 30 credits up to a few hundred. Thinking about the difference, Jason was tempted to purchase more wild beast cores, but he could do that later on if his stock was coming to its end. Furthermore, Jason decided to purchase mana stones worth 1 million credits and 300 low awakened ranked cores for 32 credits per core. He wanted to make a few tests with Artemis, and he himself also wanted to improve his level, and mana stones were the easiest way to enhance his mana core level. There were many other things he purchased for emergencies, like a portable tent, long-lasting food, water, many clothes, including boots, kerosene, many potions, ropes, and so on. It was 10 p.m. when he finished everything, and Jason went into bed after practicing the Heaven's Hell technique. Chapter 53 Let's Go by Hydesgrain. Jason felt something on his head, and unsurprisingly it was Artemis. Waking up, he stroked her a few times before entering his soul world to practice the Heaven's Hell technique, when he suddenly noticed that his soul world core has increased in size while the produced soul energy was much more than before. Looking at the amount, Jason estimated that his soul energy has reached a minor threshold of 5 units. The night before, it was quite a distance away from 5 units and closer to 4 than 5. Jason's first thought was that Artemis broke into the 3-star wild beast rank, and he was right. This caused Jason to be overjoyed, and his lips curled up. He hadn't felt any difference from his body, but maybe it was because he was still sleepy. Practicing the Heaven's Hell technique, his soul energy was fast depleted, and he left the soul world to look at Artemis. While Jason made himself ready, he felt the changes within his body. His body itched a little bit, but it wasn't unbearable, so he tried to ignore it as well as possible. Compared to before, his mana core was already close to the 7th level, while his physique was also at the threshold for the 6th level. And his core was almost at its limit and close to a breakthrough, so he would be able to level up soon. And my strength also increased quite a lot, including my mana core. Ha ha ha, Artemis and my soul are so nice. Jason was happy when he heard a knocking. Jason, are you awake? We have to go soon. If you don't answer me, I'll wake you up in 3.2.1. Jason heard a teasing voice that was familiar but also unknown, because this personality definitely wasn't suitable for the person he imagined. Stop that, Greg. I'm awake. I'll come down soon. Let me at least wash up and change my clothes. Leaving the room, he was on his way down to the living when he met Malia, who wore a revealing white nightgown out of silk, and Jason's eyes grew almost double in size seeing her revealing figure. She is really beautiful, Jason thought, and gulped down his saliva. Despite only being able to see slightly more than 1 month, he was still able to distinguish between good-looking girls or women and beautiful ones. There weren't any feelings coming from Jason, but he still admired his sight when Malia looked at him with tired eyes. Before she could greet him, she saw his gaze and looked down, only to see her revealing nightgown. Crying out in surprise, she immediately disappeared into her room, only to appear a moment later with some clothes on. Her cheeks were beet red and she rushed down to the living room without taking a single glance at Jason. Jason could only silently follow her, thinking that she looked really beautiful, without having any hard feeling. Rather than a potential lover or something like that, he thought of Malia as a friend. And Jason was way too young to think about something like that, to begin with. At least that was his opinion. Getting stronger was much more important for now. Going down to the living room, Jason noticed that everyone was already sitting at the table, waiting for him. He sat down and greeted everyone. Breakfast began and there was an abundant variety of food Jason could eat. He even noticed that a marginal amount of mana was radiating from some dishes, which surprised him greatly as his eyes widened slightly. The whole breakfast was relatively quiet and only Gabriella asked Jason if Artemis, who sat on Jason's shoulder, was in need of food, which Jason declined politely. It was uncommon for beasts to be so excessively indigent and close to their contractor, as Artemis called for many caresses from Jason. Most beasts would be close to their master, but they would still prefer freedom than getting confined closely inside a house or being so excessively close to their master like Artemis. Greg's first soul bond, the reinforced horned bull, for example, was already fully matured and at the mid-evolved rank. But the more important fact was that the bull didn't like houses and would avoid them if possible. Getting reminded about food, he looked at his notifications after they finished breakfast and Jason requested for his parcel to get delivered immediately. He went out and took in his parcel, which he stored away. Jason wanted to break into the 5th novice rank as soon as possible, but they would start their trip soon, so he had to wait until they started. Before their trip would start, they had some things to do. Jason saw a large armored truck appearing at the entrance of the mansion out of Mark's storage device. The truck was covered in layers of metal and reinforced by magic circles and runes that shone brightly, while the truck itself floated thanks to the magic anti-gravitational circles. It was a specially made truck for off-road purposes outside the dome, and it would be pretty useful because the landscapes were uneven and full of obstacles. Jason estimated that the length of the truck was around 25 meters, including the hovering trailer. While it was empowered by dense and thick mana, the easiest way to provide this would be mana stones. He didn't even want to think about the price one had to pay to travel through the whole island, and he decided to not care about it as he didn't have to pay the price. While the greater storm eagle and the scaled wolf were already standing in front of the trailer, Jason thought that the fox cubs were probably getting fed before they would start their trip. Going to the backyard, Jason saw a completely different beast cage next to his own. While it was bigger than his cage and had a slightly blue color, the mana radiating from it was no joke. The lower body was densely packed with bars, preventing the fox cubs to leave the cage. Jason inspected the beast cage intently, and it looked like the whole beast cage was one entity. Such kind of beast cages were extremely rare and made out of special materials, while it had many different modifiers, including the densely packed bars modification that was activated at the moment. Inside the beast cage, Jason could see the fox cubs gathering around a big fancy machine. Out of this machine, bottles stuck out and the lesser elemental fox cubs almost fought to suck at them. Apparently, the Fleurs bought an automatic feeding machine for cubs which included a heater and so on. It was operated by mana like almost everything and could easily feed 10 beast cubs at the same time. It was only 4:30 a.m. when everything was loaded and checked twice. They entered the vehicle. The truck's interior was spacious and looked futuristic, and Greg, Malia, and Jason entered the back of it while Gabriella remained in the front with Mark, who drove. Closing the door, Mark turned the engine on and they took off. Above the city, an old man was floating in the sky, releasing a marginal amount of mana to defy gravitation, while an old but refined woman with silver hair stood next to him, huge green ivory wings spreading behind her. The old man was looking down and his gaze followed the treasure he had chosen inside the truck while a smile emerged on his face. Previously he considered Jason useless because his soul energy was extremely weak and almost equal to non-existent, followed by his almost neglectable mana core rank, but seeing his actions over the course of the last few weeks, the old man was more and more astonished about the youth's feats. Not only was the snowflake owl, he himself deemed as trash and useless, superior to all snowflake owls he had ever seen, able to break through its racial limit within a few weeks, but also Jason's weak soul energy could contain the snowflake owl, which meant his soul energy increased by a few folds. After watching Jason for a few weeks, he was sure that his soul had to either amplify an enormous amount from the soul bond to the contractor, or something else was the crux. From his vast knowledge, the old man had accumulated over dozens of years, he knew that every soul was different, which included the soul energy, soul affinity, soul amplification, soul physical enhancement, and soul energy replenishing time. A 24 hours reproduction time for soul energy was only the researched average, and it was different for every individual. Is he really that precious? The woman next to him questioned uncertainly. The old man's smile widened, and his decision to get Jason was now affirmed, after what he witnessed. I hope so, he whispered while looking down. Show me some more of your potential, Jason Stellar, the old man said as both of them vanished into thin air. Chapter 54 Speed. By Hydesgrain. The truck was driving slowly, due to the speed limit inside the city, but once they left the city it began to accelerate to a certain extent. It wasn't extremely fast because they had to be careful of the surrounding humans who could run around her and there inside the dome, but it was still fast. After a few minutes, one could see the dome, and the truck drove through the dome without getting obstructed in any kind of way. What then happened astonished Jason extremely, because Mark pressed a button on the mainboard causing the truck to ascend slightly. The advanced anti-gravitational magic circles were shining brightly, and Jason saw that they reached the limit of their ability when the hovering truck reached a height of around 3 meters. Next to Mark was a holographic screen with a detailed map of asterisks, and a few large gray spots could be seen on it. The whole island was divided into many different areas which were probably wild zones. Each of these areas was marked with a certain amount of black stars, and Jason thought that 1 star was probably the indicator for a 1-star wild zone because they were driving through the 1-star plains, while the map said they drove through a that was labeled with a single black star. Jason found it interesting as he looked through the whole map, which was filled with many different kinds of landscapes. Mana was capable of many things, and since the mana outbreak, mana environments in some areas changed completely. It didn't matter anymore where the equator was or how far away one is from the sun compared to other places, the temperature and environment was almost completely dependent on the surrounding mana and natural-born treasures. Magical treasures are able to change the whole environment with their radiating mana. Even after the treasure was discovered and collected, the remains would cause the environment to continue transforming. It was still unknown how exactly the environment changed, but there were a few theories, like it was with everything new. Asterix's north was filled with many white spots, while in the center of the island was a huge volcano. Jason knew that right now their position was relatively close to the ice fields, but more east, and they would travel closer to the volcano to enter Syro City, which was somehow between the volcano and the northern ice fields. But Jason was also astonished to see that except for the few empty areas, the strongest area was a single red star, while 1 to 4 black stars represented the correspondent wild zone. He concluded that the strongest zones were thus a magical beast zone. Thinking about the empty gray areas, Jason concluded that stronger beasts must live there while humans didn't dare or maybe cared to venture through it. While Jason was in thoughts about what kinds of beast could be higher than magical beasts, the hovering truck accelerated its speed to an astonishing speed. It reached more than 300 kilometers per hour, and once Jason looked through the window, he almost shrieked out in shock. Isn't that too dangerous? But apparently, they flew a detour and avoided areas with huge hills, big rocks and certain types of trees. With this speed, we still need 2 days until we arrive at Giro City. And Mark said they have to drive through the night. Malia and Greg didn't mind the hovering truck's speed and absorbed mana from small mana stones or read some files on their holographic screen. Jason noticed that and decided to not mind the truck anymore and to absorb mana for himself. Taking out a mana stone, Artemis noticed that and she tried to grab it, which Jason prevented. He took out 5 5-star wild beast cores and told her to eat them and digest them. If she was done, he would give her an awakened beast core, which made her happy, and Jason wanted to test out if there was a difference in the conversion rate between her digestion, because the amount of mana was the same for 5 5-star wild beast cores and a low awakened beast core. Artemis was not satisfied with the wild beast's cores and annoyed Jason, forcing him to give her the mana stone, but he was resolute. A few minutes later, Jason finally convinced Artemis, and she gulped down the cores before she went into the soul world to digest them. Meanwhile, Jason made himself ready to absorb mana out of the mana stones. He hoped that he would be able to break into the 5th novice rank either today or the day after. Closing his eyes, he loosened up a mana thread from the mana stone in his hand, leading it into him. After circling it through his mana channels, he inserted them in his mana core. Hours passed, and unknown to Jason, it was already lunchtime. While the landscapes changed, the truck drove through them like it was nothing. Not a single beast could be seen, and this was probably because of the beast repellent used on the truck and its scary appearance. They only drove through 1 3-star wild zones, and not a single beast could harm them if they were confident enough to try it. Surprisingly, Artemis woke him up at 2 p.m. and she had already digested 5 5-star cores, which was quite impressive. He had thought that she would at least need a day to digest them completely, but not even half of the estimated time passed. Jason's stomach grumbled and he decided to eat something. Everyone would eat something when they were hungry, because the time needed to gather mana was more important, and it could be quite serious to distract someone while absorbing it. A mistake could lead to serious injuries. This problem wouldn't occur with Artemis because he already felt that she was awake before she annoyed him, and Jason finished absorbing the mana cleanly. Jason was really astonished about the increased speed of his mana absorption rate with a mana stone, and he felt that even if his mana core increased because of Artemis's sudden rise in her level, he would be able to break through tomorrow. Before he ate something, he gave Artemis an awakened beast core and she gulped it down greedily. Jason wondered if Artemis would eat up all his stocks if he did not control her, seeing her not being satisfied with the single core. Artemis entered his soul world dejected, and Jason followed her to practice the Heaven's Hell technique. After 20 minutes he was already done and left the soul world once again. Looking outside, Jason noticed that the scenario changed slightly, and to his left the whole area was filled with lush and blossoming plants and wildlife, while the right side was rather scarce. Looking at the map, Jason noticed that to his right side was a 3-star wild zone next to a 1-star magical winter field zone, while to his left was a 2-star zone next to a large swampland. He couldn't distinguish many features because of the hovering truck's extreme speed, but there was no way to miss certain enormous trees with a size of at least 100 meters. Chapter 55: Secret Rivalry by Hydesgrain. After eating, Jason noticed that both Malia and Greg were still preoccupied with absorbing mana, and Jason noticed that they haven't moved since they started their trip. This astonished him extremely. Before, he thought that everything depends on one's wealth in the end. Jason knew that both Greg and Malia were strong, but previously his opinion about them was different, and he thought that it was only because of their family's wealth. They were really determined, and Jason found himself much more motivated than before. Sitting down again, he absorbed the mana more greedily, and the sky turned dark, while the interior of the hovering truck began to shine in a white light. Jason was breaking through, and everyone noticed that the mana around Jason gathered forcefully with an incredible suction, slowing down Greg's and Malia's mana gathering greatly. They noticed that Jason was about to break through, finished their mana absorption, and looked at Jason without distracting him. Gabriella and Mark didn't know that Jason only absorbed mana for almost 2 months yet, but Greg and Malia knew it, and they were shocked to see Jason breaking through once again. Even if most people said the first steps are the easiest and fastest while increasing one's mana core rank, this wasn't necessarily the case without a certain degree of control. One needed to control the mana through all mana channels and inserting it afterward gently into the mana core, and to do something like that took a lot of time and was very taxing to the body. While Greg's sensitivity to mana wasn't that high, Malia had a high sensitivity. Both began to sense mana at the age of 8, and Greg took half a year to reach the second novice rank while Malia needed 2 months to reach it. As they were really young, it was even more taxing to their body to absorb mana for too long, and the time to make a big circle through one's mana channels was relatively long, causing the growth to slow down a lot. It takes a child quite a long time to comprehend what mana was, how precious it was, and how to absorb it more efficiently. For them, it seemed like Jason's sensitivity and control over mana was extremely high, even if his mana core rank was still below the average middle school graduates. Greg was jealous because his sensitivity was worse compared to Jason and Malia's, and he noticed more and more that he had no time to grow stronger if he didn't want Jason to overthrow him in the future. Right now his only unique characteristic compared to his future classmates would be his soul and his first soul bond, which would increase his combat prowess. Greg estimated that he would only be an average student in Syro City because of his low rank, which frustrated him. Seeing Jason breaking through one shackle after another, while Ha also had such a special mutated snowflake owl, Greg could only do a single thing: work harder. He would never allow Jason to catch up to him. At least he would give his best to prevent that. Greg decided that Jason would be his arch-rival, even if he was less than a small mouse before when he was blind. Right now Jason looked like a fierce dragon to Greg, when he saw the white shining cocoon slowly dissipating and Jason's golden eyes that opened slowly, gleaming with vigor, while his black hair fluttered lightly in the air thanks to a perfectly timed draft. Meanwhile, Malia had extremely complicated feelings. On one side she was astonished about Jason's speed, but her mother had already told her that Jason had mana eyes and that he was probably extremely sensitive to mana because of that. But after seeing Jason after the cocoon vanished, her heart fluttered slightly and she had to pinch herself to fall out of a trance. He is more than 2 years younger than you. What are you even thinking, you wench? Shaking her head, she congratulated Jason, before she averted her gaze and took something out of her spatial storage to eat. Everyone congratulated Jason and he smiled lightly before he scanned his own body again. Reaching the 5th novice rank felt nice. His physique and mana core received both a nice push. While his mana core reached the size of a quasi 7th novice, his physique broke into the 6th novice rank thanks to the amplification provided by Artemis through their soul bond. There was a big difference between a mana pool of a 6th and a 7th novice rank because it was a minor threshold one had to break before one could break into the level, and Jason was about to weaken this limit once he reached the 6th novice rank or Artemis reached the 4-star wild beast rank. The limit other people had to face would be easily weakened by him reaching the 6th novice rank. Jason changed his clothes because they were full of filth and impurities, and after he had changed, they talked for some time while eating lunch with a comfortable ambience. Afterward, Jason entered his soul world only to notice that his soul energy has increased by a small amount. Smiling lightly, Jason knew that it was because his mana core increased rank increase. His physique also increased and his whole body improved because of his breakthrough. His soul energy was around 5.3 now if he were to estimate it, and Jason was getting more and more confident in himself because the worst thing about him was his low soul energy. But he was still not able to gather his courage to ask Greg how high his soul energy was because his starting point was much higher than his. Thinking solely about the soul energy provided by the reinforced bull, Jason gulped. Thinking for a moment, Greg was estimated to have soul energy of 450 while a mid-evolved beast has around 300. With a 10% share, Greg's soul energy would increase by 30 only because of his soul bond. Jason didn't know if Greg practiced the Heaven's Hell technique every day or not, but if he did, his soul energy might have reached something between 600 to 700 or even more. He was barely holding his tears, thinking about that, but he held them in and decided to practice the Heaven's Hell technique as often as possible because he noticed that his soul energy production rate increased slightly, while his soul world was enlarged concurrently. Jason's head was aching all the time, but he was almost numb to the pain after such a long time, which was somehow good and bad at the same time. Chapter 56 Jiro. By Hydesgrain. It was already late at night, but Jason was still fully awake, eager to absorb more mana. This condition was one of the advantages one would get by absorbing large amounts of mana. He decided to make a night shift and solidify his mana core to prevent any flaws in his foundation while waiting for Artemis to finish her digestion. He wanted to know exactly how much difference there was between 5 5-star wild beast cores and one of the lowest awakened beast cores. Maybe it would be helpful for the future. Furthermore, Jason wanted to practice the Heaven's Hell technique as soon as his soul energy was reproduced. He continued absorbing mana out of mana stones, and it was around 4 a.m. when he was woken up by Artemis. She had digested the awakened core in slightly more than 13 hours, which was around 3 hours longer than she needed for 5 5-star wild beast cores, and Jason took notes about it. He had already bought many wild ranked cores and would use them for Artemis, so he wasn't disgruntled or anything like that after finding out that the awakened beast cores were roughly 30% better and the one who had to suffer was Artemis and not him, so he was a little bit sorry for her, but that was it. She had to eat the wild ranked cores for the time being, and he would switch them out when the stock was used up, or the effect almost not strong enough anymore. Morning came and Jason was still absorbing mana. He had already used up 3 small mana stones and thus 150,000 credits, which shocked him quite a bit. Jason didn't know that he would have to use so many mana stones for a breakthrough into the 5th novice rank and to solidify the foundation. With the 17 small mana stones he had left, Jason would probably be unable to enter the 7th novice stage, as only using mana stones was unhealthy for the body. One would have to absorb a certain amount of naturally generated mana and not mana compressed into the stones, transmuted over the course of time. Jason didn't want to absorb mana from mana stones during the remaining journey, and he decided to read the Beastarium while trying to improve his proficiency in passively gathering mana. He was able to do it after almost a week, but his reading speed was really slow compared to before, and Jason was only able to even read at his current speed because of his extraordinary eyes. Otherwise, he might even not read because a sloth would be faster. Every few hours Jason entered his soul world to practice the Heaven's Hell technique, and practicing this technique somehow grew to his heart because he could improve his soul energy because of it, even if it was painful. After practicing the technique 3 times, they arrived at the borders of a large dome which radiated even denser and more formidable mana fluctuations. Looking through his mana eyes, Jason noticed that the density of it was at least 3-fold the amount, and he was astonished to see the walls of a large city. Normally one would ask why there were walls, but Jiro City was a B-grade city close to a few magical beast zones, and the defenses of the dome couldn't instantly kill batches of magical beasts once they attacked human shelters. That's why gigantic and stupendous walls were built. Jiro City was often attacked by beast tides, but the walls were always enough to stop these tides with the help of mankind's artillery and other weapons. One could ask if it was even worthwhile to live in such a threatened city, as it could always happen that the defensive measures would collapse, but the answer was simple. Yes. If one wanted to get stronger, one would have to enter more dangerous zones because of the thick mana, higher graded herbs and ores, and the possibility of natural-born treasures. It was said that even inside Jiro City the density would be much higher and almost comparable to that of a 2 or maybe even 3-star wild zone. Jason was already astonished about the mana density of a 1-star wild zone, and he was expected to visit Jiro City even if he was slightly frustrated about the situation with the Greater Storm Eagle. However, there wasn't much he could do about it, and he tried to think about the Fox Cubes, which would find their new soul buddies soon. Mark had already a few people who contacted him about the forum post only high-quality beast merchants had access to, and they were reliable sources, so the scaled wolf and more than half of the fox cubs were quasi-sold. They could freely enter the city's dome, but there was a fee one had to pay each time one would enter the dome, but the price was relatively okay with 500 credits. If the same was to happen when he entered the dome of the C-grade city, Jason would cry a river because he didn't have any money previously and it was more likely daylight robbery. But the dome had to be operated somehow, and the fee was likely the main source of income for the operating of it, so nobody objected to the fee. Unfortunately for Mark was, however, that he had to pay the entrance fee for every unbound beast, which was more than 150 beasts. 500 credits were not much, but the quantity made a difference. Once they entered the dome, The scenario changed slightly and Jason could see that the landscape was lusher and green, more apparent than inside the C-grade city, but it was still less wildered than the zones outside the dome, which was typical. Each magic dome was made out of materials which would absorb mana from its surrounding, but that was the only way to provide enough energy to it, as the dome was like a glutton. It was unknown how much mana it could absorb, but it was definitely a lot. Entering through a futuristic-looking gate, one could instantly see a huge difference compared to Artes City where they previously lived. The streets had more lanes, while even a few flying shuttles could be seen, and the skyscrapers were ridiculously high and Jason wondered why they didn't collapse. There was even a huge stadium-like shopping center with 30 floors which looked magnificent. Everything looked so expensive and Jason wondered where the slums were. But after asking that, everyone looked at him with a perplexed expression, asking themselves why he would ask something like that. Compared to C-grade cities, the slums were probably comparable to below-average districts, but once one was too poor to sustain oneself for living in a B-grade city, one would rather move into a C or D-grade city, as most B-grade cities were used for companies, hunters, the government, above-average families, military training and so on to improve their mana core rank within the city and hunt outside the dome. Human society nowadays was cruel, and once one couldn't afford to live in a city, one would get passively removed with the next migration group. It was cruel, but like that society had the thought that it would be easier to work hard. Once one would be able to reach a certain degree of strength or wealth, one would be able to move into a higher city and the other way around. Everyone in a B-grade city had a certain standard amount of wealth, strength or other advantages most citizens from C-grade cities didn't have, except they wanted to live in a lower-graded city due to personal reasons, like it was the case with the Flays. They were wealthy enough to live within Syro City, but due to Greg, they moved to a faraway C-grade city, in order for Greg to recover from his elementary grade trauma. Jason felt complicated when he read something like that, but like always, he wasn't able to change anything at all. Chapter 57: Meeting the Client by Hydesgrain. Because they were already late, they immediately drove to their client, who waited for them impatiently. Each of the three youths was uncomfortable with meeting the noble that treated soulbonds as objects, and their faces showed it clearly. Gabriella had to remind them to show at least a calm or neutral facial expression in order to not upset them, as they were one of the overlords of Jiro City. After a 30-minute drive through the city, they arrived in front of a huge wall with many guards and automatic mana turrets all over the walls. Next to a gigantic gate were at least 20 guards protecting it. Jason activated his mana eyes to inspect their mana cores. They seemed to be stronger than Malia's, but weaker Mark and Gabriella's, which could already be considered relatively strong. To Jason, everyone was strong, so he didn't even try to compare himself. But he still wondered why there were so many high defensive measures. What are they scared about, and who did they offend, or did they just build the wall and hire these guards for safety matters to save themselves once a beast tide stormed the large wall? Jason wasn't sure, but there was no answer he could think of right off the bat. While their hovering truck neared the wall, a notification popped up at the truck's mainboard, and Mark had to tell his purpose to come to the mansion and who he was, which included an verification of his ID. Everything went well without issue, and they drove through the gate unhindered. The garden was gigantic and had the size of multiple football fields, while many different buildings could be seen. There were stables, a building looking like a coliseum, a small pagoda that continuously attracted large amounts of mana, many luxurious houses surrounding a magnificent, large mansion that stood next to a large sea with a beautiful landscape. "Is that a village or what?" Greg exclaimed, and even Mark and Gabriella were astonished about what they saw. When they went closer to the villa, they could even see some fields with crops on them. It was really as if they were inside a village. Why? Nobody would be able to answer it, except their client. In front of the villa stood a fat middle-aged man and a slightly younger version of the fat man. Both saw the truck driving towards them and waited somehow patiently, while the young man looked slightly anxious. The young man was probably Mark and Gabriella's client, and the youths had to calm down themselves as anger raged within them and could be seen in their eyes. After the truck stopped, everyone went out and the middle-aged man greeted the guests. "Hello, my esteemed guests. My name is Rodriguez Olea and I contacted you because of the Greater Storm Eagle mission. I'm sorry to say that, but we are short on time. May we skip the long chat and go directly into our business? Mark and Gabriella expected that their client was short on time and didn't waste any of it. The Greater Storm Eagle, who was placed last into the trailer, was taken out by a large metallic arm. While the middle-aged man kept talking to the Flay parents, the young fatty ran to the Greater Storm Eagle, viewing it with a weird smile. The chubby youth was probably 18 years old or maybe even older, but his behavior was worse than most 6-year-old children, causing everyone to look at him with despise. Greg, Malia, and Jason were disgusted, as they previously still hoped that the noble was regretful about causing the Greater Storm Eagle to die, but apparently that wasn't the case. When the fat youth looked into the trailer, Jason had a bad premonition, and right at the worst timing the fox cubs woke up and squeaked due to them being hungry. They struggled their way to the automatic feeding machine and began to eat. This could be seen by the fat youth, and interest could be seen in his eyes as he mumbled, "Lesser elemental fox cubs." Jason stopped breathing for a moment, and he wasn't alone, as the Flay siblings also sensed something wrong. The fat youth turned away from the eagle and looked vividly at the fox cubs. Averting his gaze, his loud reached his father. "Dad, you said I should search for an awakened beast because my soul fits 4 larger beasts and a weaker one, right? I think I found a suitable beast for this spot. There are lesser elemental fox cubs inside the trailer." FK was the word in everyone's mind. While the middle-aged man's attention was drawn to the trailer, Gabriella looked slightly worried while Mark was still calm. "That's true, we have lesser elemental fox cubs in the trailer, but I've already made a contract with the seller of these cubs and another one with the purchases, so there is not a single one left to sell." "I'm sorry." Mark was calm and explained everything while adding some made-up story to the truth, which would add another layer of protection. Having made 2 contracts was not worth the effort to pay for remuneration, as for breach of a contract was normally 5 to 10 times the price of the beast. For 2 contracts the price would be 10 to 20 times more expensive. If Mark wanted to sell them for 200,000, one had to pay 2 to 4 million, which normally wasn't worth the effort. Adding another fact with a gentle reminder, Mark drew the attention to a different subject. "May we go back to our business? The Sorbonne needs time to consolidate, otherwise your opponent might notice something wrong, and we don't want something like that to happen, right, Mr.?" Rodriguez turned back to Mark and said, slightly frowning, "Oh, yes. Normally I wouldn't back off against a measly contract breach, but it's certainly true that we are in a hurry. Let's finish our business and part our ways." Everyone sighed in their minds, while the young fat man was a little bit sad, but he didn't mind that he couldn't get a fox cub, as his father would probably give him something even better later. Pouting a little bit, he was still noisy, and Jason decided to close the trailer to prevent any fox cub sounds to reach the outside, which could attract the attention of the fat youth and his father once again. Rodriguez asked once again about the contract and the breach remuneration because he wanted to give his son another beast with a good elemental ability, and lesser elemental foxes were relatively good for their mana core rank, but Mark was firm in his rejection. "The contract with our salesperson was slightly special, so it should be almost impossible to sell a beast for." Jason liked Mark more and more. Even if he was greedy, he still wouldn't break a contract, which astonished him a little bit. He would probably be able to earn a few million from him if he was about to sell him a single fox cub only because of the remuneration. If Jason had to be honest, he saw the remuneration clause for the fox cubs but thought it was enough, 5 times the price. That would only be 1.3 million credits for a single cub, and Rodriguez tried to purchase the fox cub even if he knew that he had to pay a remuneration of 2 to 4 million at the least. After the deal was over, the Flays and Jason hurriedly said goodbye and left the slightly dejected fat middle-aged man with the chubby youth next to him, while the Greater Storm Eagle stood behind. Everyone sighed in relief, and a thick sweat pearl could be seen running down Mark's temples. While they were on their way out, a red armored pickup drove by, and Jason could see a young man sitting in the driver's seat. His eyes were blood red, and Jason felt weird looking at him. The youth couldn't see him, but there was an eerie feeling around him when Jason saw him for a very short moment. Chapter 58 Holy White Bakuri Fruit by Hydesgrain. Because Mark and Gabriella had to deliver the fox cubs to the beast merchants who messaged them a few days ago, the three youths decided to go shopping. The shopping centers and stalls in Jiro City were much grander than the ones in Artes City and filled with many different things to buy which one couldn't purchase in Artes City. Greg and Jason were astonished about the things they could purchase because it was the first time for Jason to be in a different city than Artes City, and Greg was never in a shopping street when he was younger and lived in Syro City. Malia was unbothered by most things one could purchase, except some clothes and exotic weapons attracted her attention, which Jason found funny. Jason had around 20 million credits and he wanted to use them to purchase mana stones and other things. When he arrived in Syro City he would have a week left before the school started, and it was very important for him to increase his combat prowess until then, because of different reasons, including the student rankings on the first day. Because of that, he would have to improve his combat experience and combat skills. That's why Jason wanted to enter a 2-star wild zone when he arrived in Syro City. To protect himself he wanted to purchase a mana gun, or more exactly the Manam 9, with an effective firing range of 200 meters. With its black metallic color made out of black iron, a length of 217 mm, 8.5 in, and a barrel length of 125 mm, 4.9 inches, Jason would be able to handle it easily with one hand, and Jason adored the exterior design, causing him to purchase one. A common M9 pistol was a grade 1 mana gun, with its specialization being a pistol with weak recoil and a standard magazine size of 15 bullets. It could easily kill evolved beasts with a single shot inside a vital area and was as such extremely dangerous. But the most frightening aspect about this weapon was its price. 3 million credits with 4 filled magazines, common mana bullets. However, Jason still decided to purchase it as defensive measures, and furthermore, Jason bought another 300 common mana bullets and many other types of ammunition like armor-piercing bullets, explosive bullets, boat tails bullets, and more. Adding everything together, Jason's bank account was reduced by around 4 million credits with a single purchase, causing a devastating expression to appear on his face. My money! He sulked, but this thought was fast replaced. Because he still had around 16 million credits left, Jason decided to use 4 million credits to purchase mana stones as an investment for himself. With 12 million credits and 97 small mana stones left, Jason was confident to reach the later levels of the novice rank, easily. Exclamation mark. Jason even saw some soul weapons inside the shops, but he was uninterested in them at the moment because he wasn't able to afford them even if he feigned interest. Greg found a heavyweight vest which one could adjust to one's needed weight to train. While Greg bought a heavyweight vest which he could adjust from 1 kilogram to 3,000 kilograms, Jason found this also interesting and he decided to purchase a heavyweight vest with an adjustable weight from 1 to 500 kilograms. It was priced at 2 million credits and Jason had now only half of his fortune left. Nevertheless, Jason would wear it during every workout and adjust his strength like that. They continued their stroll when Jason saw something he didn't think he could find in a previous stall. Jason's knowledge was solid and vast compared to his peers, except for his lack in telling pictures to some beasts, which he was already catching up. When he saw a particular fruit of one stall with its mana fluctuations, Jason's eyes bulged slightly and he went closer. Jason hadn't seen many fruits radiating mana, but this fruit even had a paper-thin black color radiating from it. This was something he had never seen and he wondered what was going on with this fruit. It was a holy white bakuri, which was a low class 1 fruit, and its price was stated for 10 million credits. Malia and Greg noticed his gaze and Malia informed him about the fruit. The holy white bakuri fruit is a rare fruit which can only be found in mana-dense magic zones or permanent rifts. Occasionally it is found in 4-star wild zones, but it is extremely rare. This fruit is able to completely dissolve one's mana core shackles until one reaches the lower depth rank. It is used by influencing heirs to increase their cultivation speed to a certain degree. Comparing their speed with the same amount of mana sensitivity and control, the one who used a holy white bakuri fruit would be much faster to reach the levels 4th and 7th up to the novice core limit. There would be no thresholds between the 3rd and 4th, and 6th and 7th level if one used the holy white bakuri fruit, and one could easily enter the adept rank. Looking at this fruit, I'm sure that this is only one of the lowest ranked holy light bakuri fruits that exist, otherwise, its price would be much higher. The vendor listened to the youths talking, and in the beginning, he was confident that one of these youths might purchase the holy white bakuri fruit, but after the young woman finished her small lesson, he began to sweat lightly. It was true that this fruit was one of the worst possible ranks had, and 10 million credits were probably a scam, but he had to sell them because he was in a huge debt, so he tried his best to the fruit palatable. My dear customer, if you purchase this holy white bakuri fruit for 10 million credits, this grade 2 perennial neoxid box prevents the declining effect of class 2 herbs for more than 5 years if it's not opened consistently. Listening to the vendor, Jason's interest was piqued. The fruit was already in a box and couldn't release its magical effect, but if Jason bought this fruit it would be without the perennial neoxid box. He didn't want to purchase the holy white bakuri fruit for himself, rather it was to experiment with something once he got a new soul bond. Jason was way too curious, and he had already researched for quite some time about the price for purifying items or fruits, and the lowest price was around 25 million. This holy white barusi fruit would probably be the cheapest purification fruit Jason would be able to get his hand on for the time being, so he decided to purchase it. Receiving a grade 2 perennial neoxid box in addition to the holy white baka fruit was also nice, because it was worth 2 million credits alone. While Jason transferred 10 million credits, he was left with around 100.000 credits. Malia and Greg were a little bit astonished about his purchase, but they found it was still a good idea because Jason had no time left to break through the shackles, and saving time was always good and a decent investment in one's human capital. Right now Jason was just too weak, and it would only hinder him to wait for a natural breakthrough. They didn't know that Jason did not purchase the fruit for himself, rather for his future beast, but he wouldn't say it out loud if nobody asked. Jason was also curious why there were shackles to the 4th and 7th level while the walls to a new rank were quite normal. He couldn't understand the walls in between the ranks. One had to know that the ranking system was only established 200 years ago, and there were still many theories out that the mana cultivation system was wrong and should be revised. But there weren't any proofs, and theories alone were not good enough to cause a revision of an established system. Suddenly the three of them heard a loud siren resounding through the streets and a mechanical voice spreading right afterward. Attention please, due to some unforeseen reasons, a large number of beasts have stepped through the magical dome. They are now on their way to the city walls. Please stay calm and go to the closest shelter or into safe proximity. This is not a test. This is not a test. Chapter 59 Lurking Danger by Hydesgrain. Jason stored the perennial neoxid box with the holy white bakuri inside away as they continued their shopping trip, while his whole fortune was already used up except a small sum. It was already late afternoon and the youths were about to go back to the Flay parents when a loud siren sound voiced through the alley and the whole city. Attention please, due to some unforeseen reasons, a large number of beasts have stepped through the magical dome. They are now on their way to the city walls. Please stay calm and go to the closest shelter or into safe proximity. This is not a test. This is not a test. Huh. Jason, Malia, and Greg looked at each other, not sure what to do or where to go. Greg and Jason were never in such a situation, and they hoped Malia was more proficient with such situations. The first one who came back down to earth was Malia, and she opened the map of Jiro City and set a route to the closest shelter to them. But before they could even go, they heard loud roars from outside the city resounding through the streets as a black mass covered the sky from the side they were able to hear the roars. It was unknown what happened, but when they saw the huge black mass, they felt scared, and it was as if black eyes threatened their whole existence. Once they recovered from their fright, they began to rush to the next shelter like thousands of humans did. The shopping alley was overflowed with humans, and everyone charged in the same direction, not caring if they overrun anything. From the corner of his eyes, Jason could even see a young girl crying on the side alone, and he wanted to help, when he was pushed away by an expert ranked man, whose eyes were filled with fear. Not understanding, What's going on? Jason was even slightly scared of getting overrun by higher-ranked humans, as their speed was faster than him. He would be left alone if Malia and Greg didn't slow down for him, covering him slightly with their higher physique. It was ridiculous to see that even laborers and normal receptionists were faster than Jason and probably also stronger even if their combat experience was close to zero. While running, many thoughts streamed through his mind. Can the soldiers handle the beast tide? Why does everyone rely on others and don't fight back even if their strength could be high enough to fight unblemished beasts? And many more questions ran through his mind, but the latter question tormented his mind more than any other of his questions. When they arrived in front of the shelter, the three youths could finally see humanity's true nature because hundreds of humans stood in front of the already closed gates and they seemed scared to their bones. Hitting the closed gates while tears poured down the desperate faces. Shock could be seen in them and small kids gripped their parents firmly, not understanding what was going on. Greg was taken aback. Did they lock out everyone? Is that some kind of bad joke? They also began to feel scared because at their rank it didn't matter how strong they were, they couldn't defeat tens of thousand beasts. Malia was still relatively calm and looked at the people in front of the closed gates. Why is our race such trash? To save ourselves we would sacrifice so much, and Jason sensed the disgust in her voice, without blaming her feelings, as he could understand her feelings completely. Apparently, the humans within the shelter closed the gates as soon as a certain number was inside, and even if there was enough space left, they threw away the charity and love for their race and closed the gates, locking them firmly. The next shelter would be quite a distance away, and Jason, who was somehow calm because Artemis was by his side, made a decision before Malia could even say anything. We can either search for your parents or hide somewhere. I'm not sure which places are the best to hide, but searching for your parents is more likely suicidal because we don't know where exactly they are. Give them an emergency signal with your GPS activated and they can rescue us as soon as possible. If nothing major happens in the district, they will come to us. Malia looked at Jason a little bit astonished because he could remain calm despite a beast tide occurring right in front of them, and she nodded approvingly. Every company or slightly larger shop had a safe room, and they decided to hide in a small shop which took in a few people until it was filled. Once the door was closed, a small group of boys and girls, probably first-grade middle schoolers, began to cry because they couldn't take the pressure. Jason was relatively calm because he had faced many beasts and was somewhat naive because he bought a pistol and was expectant to use it, which irritated him. Why am I expectant? There are thousands of humans are dying each second. Jason thought, and his excitement died down within seconds. It was unknown if the armor-piercing bullets could penetrate unblemished ranked beasts, but Jason was confident that they could at least hurt them with enough mana injected. Greg and Jason were not normal youths compared to other kids at the age of 13 to 14 because Jason matured faster due to his responsibilities and his disease, while Greg matured slightly faster than others because he faced reality in elementary school in addition to his many battles against beasts, even though he still behaved like a child sometimes. It looked like Malia faced many beast tides because she was even calmer than Jason, and before he had said something she had already sent the emergency signal to her parents. Beast tides weren't uncommon, but mankind's nature was unpredictable. It was unknown if the beast tide was even able to reach the outer district, maybe neither the inner district, and people were already panicking this much. If everyone would be behaving like they were, humanity would have already gone extinct 300 years ago. While waiting for the soldiers to clear out the beast tide, Jason could still access the network with his quantum bracelet as he tried to relax by watching some martial art technique videos about the higher understanding of the Azure Feisty 8 technique with the Dual Dagger Mastery modification. Previously he had only watched them with the Single Dagger Mastery, but now he changed his decision. While Jason watched the videos, trying to stay calm, he stayed on guard. But even so, almost everyone looked at him oddly. How could someone be so calm while a beast tide occurred? What's wrong with this youth? And where can I get such contact lenses? They are so good looking. The scared group of middle-aged men, women, and middle school students thought. Greg was still stiff, but seeing Jason eased up his tension somewhat as he sat down next to him in order to watch some videos. Right now Greg was stronger than Jason in all aspects, soul bond, strength, mana core rank, and probably even more, but Jason's calmness caused Greg's fear to die down and he wanted to be closer to him because he felt safer this way, which was completely illogical. Malia also sat down next to Jason, but only because she thought Jason was putting on a facade. However, that wasn't totally the case and Jason only hoped that the beast tide would end soon. Rather than putting on a facade, Jason was sure that magical beasts weren't able to threaten a B-grade city, at least they wouldn't be able to completely annihilate it, and even if they could, Jason wouldn't be able to do anything against it. But the main problem Jason figured out was that the possibility that a few Guardian-ranked beasts which were the rank above magical beasts led this beast tide was high, because the roars Jason heard were somewhat familiar. It felt as if Jason knew what kind of race caused the beast tide, but he just couldn't remember what it was. Furthermore, there seemed to be many different kinds of beasts Jason heard, and they wouldn't gather together just to attack the city without preying on each other if there was not something forcing them to attack Jiro City. If Jason was not wrong, someone should have either picked up a magical treasure or stolen a Guardian stage beast cub to cause such a disaster, otherwise, he couldn't think of any reason for Guardian-ranked beasts to attack a B-grade city, risking their lives for. Jason was way too confident in himself because his eyes were superior to others, his soul was unique if there was not his soul energy, and his combat prowess was also quite good, but even if he added everything together, he still couldn't face the threat of such beasts at the moment, which frustrated him. Understanding the situation they were inside once again, Jason decided to create the best possible outcome with his current ability by doing something that not many heroic authorities would do. Watching videos to calm down his surrounding. Chapter 60: Kill or Getting Killed by Hydesgrain. Minutes passed without any noises from outside the safe room until gunshots and bombing noises permeating through the streets. From the sound, it seemed like the beasts were still far away and probably not over the wall. But only 2 minutes later the first flying beasts could be seen observing the streets and diving onto their human preys that weren't able to find a place to hide. Hearing the pitiful sounds of humans crying out for help, their pained shouts mixed within the screeches of beasts, everyone felt ashamed and scared at the same time. Jason tried his best to ignore the sounds, but after he finished skimming through a few tutorial videos, he decided to take a look outside. They were mainly 4 different kinds of beasts Jason could see in the sky. I, low, mid-awakened beast, right pointing arrow, iron-feathered hawks. 2, late awakened beast, right pointing arrow, heavyweight vultures. 3, mid, late evolved right pointing arrow, thunder eagles. IV, low, mid unblemished right pointing arrow, winged wind centipede. Malia, Greg, what are the strongest ranked beasts you two can defeat once faced solo or in a group, separately seen? Jason asked without looking at them. The beast tide didn't seem normal, and Jason had a bad premonition that this beast tide wouldn't end without something huge happening. Greg and Malia also looked outside while Malia answered, I'm at the Initiate Master rank and I can defeat low unblemished ranked beasts up to 2 at once. With the help of my soul bonds, maybe 5 to 6, but that's the most I can hold out. Defeating an unblemished beast while being at the same rank meant Malia's soul bonds gave her a decent share of strength so she could fight against them head-on. Killing beasts at the same rank is harder the further one walked down the path of cultivation because the gap between human ranks and beast ranks extends only further. While Jason was astonished about her strength, Greg also answered, I'm at the 3rd adept rank and due to the physical enhancement of my soul bond, I can defeat a group of mid-awakened beasts or 2 late-awakened beasts at most. With Taurus, I can defeat a few low-evolved beasts. Jason listened carefully and looked at the mana cores of everyone within the safety room, but it looked like even if there was someone with decent strength, he or she wouldn't be able to help because everyone looked like they were going to faint once a single beast entered the room. He wasn't sure if a beast would enter this room, but some beasts were extremely sensitive to smell and pheromones, and due to the anxiety most people spread inside this room, it wouldn't be a surprise if a beast was about to notice them soon. Minutes passed and Jason was still looking around attentively, and to his shock, he could see the first beasts roaming through the streets. The gunshot sounds could still be heard, but a few beasts pushed through the defensive lines. But according to their core strength, They didn't look strong and Jason was confident to kill them with his Mana M9 pistol, so he wasn't really scared at the moment. Some good news however was that the flying beasts spread out, leaving the shopping street after they preyed on humans. There was also the possibility of them being shot down by some hunter, but the important fact was that the more time passed the fewer flying beasts roamed around the sky. A full hour passed and more beasts could be seen in the shopping street. Unfortunately, a few shops were attacked and the people inside, massacred and torn apart mercilessly. Jason, who was still confident in the beginning, was feeling slightly complicated. Turning around, he asked everyone about their strength or if someone possessed weapons to defend themselves because the situation seemed to go out of control slowly. Not a single one had a weapon and it was a disaster. Only Greg and Malia had grade 2 mana pistols that could kill unblemished beasts easily and hurt magical beasts or even kill them with some effort, but it would take some time to do that. Jason was confused that not even the shop owner had a weapon, but looking at him with his golden eyes, subconsciously spreading his intimidating aura, the shop owner began to look more and more guilty, and suddenly he gave in and told that he had a graded mana rifle to defend himself in the worst case scenarios. Everyone looked at the shop owner in contempt because he lied to them to save himself, except Jason, Malia and Greg. Could the shop owner know that Jason didn't want to steal his mana rifle to save himself? Not really, he was just scared. To be honest, everyone would at first save oneself and then maybe some strangers, without risking one's own life. Probably only the most loved family members would be saved before one would save oneself, but that was most likely it. Jason asked if they had mana weapons only because of a single reason. Once the beasts would rush into this shop, Jason would probably abandon the people inside there because he was the last who could protect someone. Being locked inside a small space with beasts was even worse than trying to survive outside. During the last hour, Gabriella sends everyone her emergency notification with the GPS and wrote that there were too many magical beasts, and if they abandoned their position, the whole defensive line would break in, which was quite unfortunate. They could hold their position and push back the beasts slightly, but that was it. If something was to happen, she ordered the youths to send her another emergency signal and they would immediately disregard the city's safety for them. When Jason read this, he was taken aback, but he nodded. He would also save his family instead of other people. Gabriella and Mark weren't responsible for the life of the citizen, rather than that they would look out for Greg and Malia if something were to happen, which Jason agreed on. While Jason was thinking carefully about what to do, a low-awakened beast began to sniff at the safety room gate, and everyone began to breathe fast, scared about the beast. Jason was most disdainful about their reaction. He could understand the middle schoolers being scared about awakened beasts, but please, there were more than enough advanced adepts and experts ranked here. Why are you scared about an awakened beast? Shush ******* adds. If there wasn't a beast tide occurring, Jason would most likely throw a fit right now, even if he didn't like attention or talking to strangers. If one was strong enough to defend themselves, fight for your life. Because the low awakened beast's action drew some attention to their shop, they had to do something. Open the gate slightly for a short moment, so I can see its head. While the others were scared about Jason's order, he took out one of his low grade 1 knives. The others tried to hold back Jason when he suddenly turned around. They could see his anger-filled golden eyes flickering coldly, which caused them to step back unconsciously, disregarding their thought of intercepting in Jason's business. Malia was still amazed and even slightly scared about his eyes, but she put up a small water wall between the three of them and the other people inside the safety room before Greg opened the gate with his vast strength. A moment later the gate closed again and the knife in Jason's hand already vanished. Jason took a deep breath and he looked slightly exhausted because he had used up more than half of his mana in an instant to inject it into the knife in order to increase the flying speed and decrease the sound, which worked perfectly fine. The low-awakened beast in front of the door collapsed lifelessly and Jason couldn't even celebrate his first awakened beast kill because he had to replenish his mana as fast as possible. Time passed slowly and Jason had now completely replenished his mana while the situation outside was getting worse because the street was filled with beasts and more shops were getting attacked, dozens of humans getting killed every second. Jason also noticed 2 new corpses in front of their shops. While one was burned, the other one was wet, and Jason understood that it was Malia who killed them with her abilities, while he had replenished his mana. He was already aware of her fire and water soul bonds because he saw the transmuted mana inside her mana core. Even Malia looked slightly worried right now, and it was only when she got another notification after the beast tide went on for more than 2 hours, that the tension eased up to a certain degree. The beast tide was almost over and the soldiers would clean up the rest of the city now. Afterward, each of the 3 youths got a message in their newly established group channel, that Gabriella and Mark were on their way. In 5 minutes at worst, would they be there, and the 3 of them were about to cry out in joy when a majestic pair of lion heads looked through the window and roared loud, before it spat fire out of its mouths, melting the shelter's gate without any hindrance. Chapter 16.